I watched them through the glass doors of our favorite restaurant, laughing as they shared the chocolate soufflé I'd introduced him to on our third date. My husband Drew, and the woman he'd been spending late nights with for the past 8 months, Olivia, his executive assistant. They looked so carefree, so comfortable at the corner table I'd always requested, her hand occasionally brushing his as they leaned in to share what appeared to be an inside joke. I sipped my espresso slowly from the café across the street, the perfect vantage point for this surreal scene playing out on a Tuesday evening. 4 weeks ago, I'd walked away without a word, no dramatic confrontation, no tearful goodbye letter. I'd simply disappeared from Drew's life, taking only what I needed and leaving behind the rest. The townhouse in Cambridge, the artwork we'd collected, the life we'd constructed over 9 years of marriage, all of it abandoned with surgical precision. Drew hadn't bothered to file a missing person report. Not that I expected him to. Our marriage had been unraveling for years, held together by networking events, investment portfolios, and the carefully curated social media presence that projected success to our peers. What I hadn't anticipated was how quickly he'd bring Olivia into the spotlight once I vanished. Perhaps I should have, given how frequently her name had appeared in our conversations over the past year. Olivia found this amazing new client. Olivia suggested this brilliant campaign approach. Olivia stayed late to help with the presentation. Olivia, it seemed, was now enjoying dessert in my place. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The server at the Daily Grind appeared beside me with a fresh espresso. Here you go, Ms. Mitchell. Sure. You don't want something stronger? You've been watching that couple for almost an hour. Just Rebecca is fine, Lisa, I reminded her with a small smile. And an espresso is perfect, thank you. From my corner table, I had an unobstructed view as Drew paid the bill, his corporate card placed confidently on the leather folder. The card linked to the account I'd helped him establish when he first made director. The position I'd coached him through interviews for while I was already 2 levels his senior at a competing firm. If only Drew had paid as much attention to the details of our finances as he did to Olivia's apparent fascination with whatever story he was now animatedly telling. My phone vibrated with a text from Robert Chen, CEO of Vertex Global. Board. Meeting confirmed for tomorrow, 9:30 a.m. All paperwork finalized. Are you certain about this approach? I typed back quickly. Absolutely. Let them enjoy their evening first. My gaze returned to the restaurant just as Drew and Olivia stood to leave, his hand settling comfortably at the small of her back. I could picture it perfectly. Drew playing the successful executive, probably embellishing his role in the company's recent acquisition, conveniently forgetting that his division had been targeted for restructuring before I accepted Robert's offer. I glanced at my watch. By now, Drew would have noticed that most of my belongings remained in our home. My clothes still hung in the closet, my books still lined the shelves, my skincare products still arranged precisely on the bathroom counter. An abandoned life, preserved like a museum to a relationship that no longer existed. Drew would be confused but relieved, assuming I'd left in a moment of emotion and would eventually come crawling back, apologetic and diminished. He didn't understand that I'd left those things behind not out of haste but calculation. Every item in that house had been photographed, documented, and legally accounted for. Every asset inventoried. Every shared account analyzed and divided, though he wouldn't discover this for approximately 17 more hours. Lisa returned to clear my espresso cup. "Friend of yours?" she asked, nodding toward the couple now walking to Drew's Audi. "My husband, actually," I replied, reaching for my purse. "Or soon-to-be ex-husband. It's complicated." Lisa's eyebrows rose slightly. "Sounds like there's a story there." "There is," I conceded, leaving a generous tip. "But it's still being written." I'd met Drew 11 years ago at an industry conference in New York. I was presenting on emerging fintech solutions while he was there representing his marketing agency. He was charming, ambitious, and refreshingly interested in my thoughts on market disruption rather than attempting to explain my own field to me. When he asked for my business card, I gave him my personal number instead. We were married within 14 months, a partnership that seemed to balance ambition with genuine connection. I continued climbing the corporate ladder at Lancaster Financial while Drew built his reputation in marketing. We renovated our Cambridge townhouse, traveled to the right destinations, attended the right events. From the outside, we were the perfect power couple. But success, it turned out, was easier for Drew to support in theory than in practice. The first fracture appeared 4 years into our marriage when I was promoted to senior vice president. Drew brought home champagne, but kept steering the celebration conversation back to his new campaign that had landed a major client. Each subsequent achievement of mine was met with increasingly transparent attempts to match or overshadow it. When Lancaster Financial merged with Vertex Global 3 years ago, I was offered the position of Chief Investment Officer, reporting directly to Robert Chen. The promotion came with a significant salary increase, pushing my income to more than double Drew's. The night I shared the news, he announced he'd been headhunted by Pinnacle Innovations. The timing seemed suspiciously convenient, but I supported his decision to accept their offer. Perhaps separate companies would ease the competitive tension that had developed between us. For a while, it seemed to work. Drew threw himself into his new role as marketing director at Pinnacle. He worked longer hours, traveled more frequently, and spoke constantly about the dynamic culture and growth potential. He also mentioned his new executive assistant, Olivia, with increasing frequency. I first met her at Pinnacle's holiday party last December. She was intelligent, poised, and noticeably attentive to Drew's needs. Anticipating when he needed a fresh drink, laughing at his industry jokes, touching his arm when emphasizing a point. I recognized the signs immediately but said nothing. Instead, I began preparing, not out of jealousy or even surprise, but out of a practical need to protect myself. I hired a private investigator, secured copies of all our financial records, and consulted discreetly with Jennifer Garcia, my best friend and corporate lawyer. Document everything, she advised over lunch in February. Not just the infidelity if it comes to that, but every financial decision, every asset acquisition. Create a complete picture of your contributions to this marriage. So I did. I tracked Drew's late nights at the office, the weekend emergency client meetings, the business trips that somehow required his assistant to accompany him when previously he'd managed alone. I noted the changes in his behavior, the passwords on his phone, the new cologne, the sudden interest in fitness. I documented my contributions to our joint assets, my disproportionate investments in our home renovations, my management of our investment portfolio. But I didn't confront him. Confrontation would only give Drew time to prepare, to hide assets, to craft a narrative that minimized his betrayal and my contributions. Instead, I waited and planned. The opportunity presented itself 2 months ago, when Robert Chen called me into his office on a Thursday afternoon. Vertex Global was preparing to acquire Pinnacle Innovations, a strategic move to expand their technology platform. As Chief Investment Officer, I had been instrumental in identifying Pinnacle as an acquisition target and structuring the financial aspects of the deal. "The board is impressed with how you've handled this," Robert said, sliding a folder across his desk. "So am I." Inside was an offer: Chief Executive Officer of Pinnacle Innovations once the acquisition was complete. I would report directly to Robert while overseeing Pinnacle's integration into Vertex Global's corporate structure. The position would give me complete authority over Pinnacle's operations, personnel, and restructuring, including Drew's marketing division. "You realize your husband works there," Robert noted, watching my expression carefully. "In a senior position." "I'm aware," I replied, maintaining professional composure. Will that be a problem? Not for me, Robert said. The question is whether it will be a problem for you. Can you separate personal and professional considerations? Completely, I assured him. In fact, I believe my familiarity with Pinnacle's culture through Drew will be an asset during the transition. What I didn't mention was that Drew had no idea about the acquisition. The negotiations had been conducted under strict confidentiality, with only Pinnacle's CEO and CFO aware of the impending change. Drew, consumed with his relationship with Olivia and his own professional ambitions, had missed the signs entirely. I accepted the position and immediately began working with Jennifer to prepare for both professional and personal transitions. The acquisition would be announced to Pinnacle employees the day after I disappeared from Drew's life, a calculated timeline that would prevent him from connecting the two events until it was too late. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. My phone buzzed with a text from Jennifer. Just left the courthouse. All paperwork filed and ready. Drew's been served yet? Tomorrow morning, I replied. Divorce papers delivered to his office approximately 2 hours before the acquisition. Announcement. Maximum impact. Jennifer had helped me craft a meticulous exit strategy, financial, legal, and personal. We had documented Drew's affair, separated our assets, and prepared divorce papers that would be difficult to contest given the evidence we had accumulated. More importantly, we had timed everything to coincide with the professional revelation that would fundamentally alter the power dynamic between us. I finished my time at the daily grind and walked to my Tesla, parked strategically where it wouldn't be visible from the restaurant. Drew still believed I drove the Audi we had purchased together last year. He didn't know I had upgraded 2 months ago, another decision made with the future clearly in mind. As I drove to my downtown apartment, a luxury unit I had purchased through an LLC 3 months earlier, I considered the carefully orchestrated events that would unfold tomorrow. By 9 a.m., Drew would receive divorce papers outlining his infidelity and the proposed division of assets, which heavily favored me given my financial contributions and his betrayal. By 11 a.m., he would be sitting in Pinnacle's conference room as the acquisition by Vertex Global was announced. And by 11:30 a.m., he would learn that his new CEO, effectively his boss's boss, was the wife he had betrayed and who had vanished from his life 4 weeks ago. The timing wasn't motivated by vindictiveness, but by efficiency. A clean break, professionally and personally, executed with the same strategic precision I brought to corporate acquisitions. At the upscale restaurant where Jennifer waited, I checked my reflection in the window, composed, confident, not a hair out of place. Nothing in my appearance suggested a woman whose marriage was dissolving, whose professional life was about to undergo a seismic shift. "You look terrifyingly calm," Jennifer observed as I slid into the booth across from her. I don't know whether to be impressed or concerned. "Be impressed," I said, accepting the glass of Cabernet she'd already ordered for me. "Everything is proceeding exactly as planned." Jennifer leaned forward, lowering her voice. "And the prenup? You're sure it's airtight with the infidelity clause?" "Absolutely certain," I replied. Drew insisted on the prenup himself when we married, assuming his career would outpace mine. He was particularly proud of the infidelity clause. If either party cheated, they forfeited claim to the other's separate property and significant assets. At the time, I think he imagined it as protection against me leaving him for a more successful man. "Ironic," Jennifer noted, unable to suppress a smile. "Indeed," I agreed. The private investigator provided conclusive evidence: hotel receipts, photographs, text message records. The prenup is clear. Once infidelity is established, the division of assets follows the predetermined formula. The conversation paused as our server approached. We ordered, maintaining the appearance of two friends enjoying a casual dinner. Once we were alone again, Jennifer shifted to the professional aspects of tomorrow's events. "The acquisition announcement is prepared," she confirmed. "Robert will introduce you as Pinnacle's new CEO immediately following the general acquisition disclosure. Your appointment is framed as strategic leadership continuity during the transition." I nodded, unsurprised. We had carefully crafted the narrative to emphasize my qualifications and minimize any appearance of conflict regarding Drew. As far as Pinnacle employees would know, my appointment and Drew's position were completely unrelated corporate decisions. "And the restructuring plan?" I asked, referring to the organizational changes that would follow the acquisition. "Finalized this afternoon," Jennifer replied. "The marketing division will report to the new chief marketing officer being brought in from Vertex. Drew's position is being redefined as marketing strategy director, a lateral move at best, arguably a demotion given the reduced autonomy." I considered this information while sipping my wine. The restructuring wasn't personal. It was based on objective evaluation of redundancies and strategic needs post-acquisition. Drew's department had underperformed for 2 consecutive quarters, and his position would have been restructured regardless of our personal relationship. That it aligned with my personal separation was coincidental, but admittedly satisfying. "He'll assume it's revenge," I noted dispassionately. "Of course he will," Jennifer agreed. "Men like Drew always personalize business decisions when they don't go their way. He won't recognize that his department's performance metrics justified the restructuring independently of your history." Our meals arrived, and we ate with the efficiency of 2 professionals accustomed to working dinners. Between bites, we confirmed final details for tomorrow: the timing of the divorce delivery, my arrival at Pinnacle, the announcement sequence, and contingency plans for various reactions. "What about Olivia?" Jennifer asked as she signaled for the check. "Transferred to the West Coast office," I replied. Again, not personal, but practical. Her skills are needed in the Seattle expansion, and separating her from Drew eliminates any appearance of ongoing impropriety that could reflect poorly on the company. Jennifer studied me with undisguised admiration. "You've thought of everything, haven't you?" "I've had months to prepare," I replied simply. Later that night, in my downtown apartment with its floor-to-ceiling views of Boston Harbor, I reviewed the final preparations for tomorrow. My presentation was polished, my talking points prepared, my professional wardrobe selected. Everything was in place for what would undoubtedly be the most consequential day in both my personal and professional lives. I opened my laptop and checked the financial monitoring alerts I'd established months ago. Drew had made a large purchase at a jewelry store yesterday, presumably a gift for Olivia, unaware that our joint credit monitoring still sent notifications to my phone. Another information advantage he had given me through carelessness. As I prepared for bed, I felt neither anger nor anxiety. Those emotions had been processed and set aside months ago, replaced by clear-eyed determination. Drew had made his choices, prioritizing ego and infatuation over partnership and loyalty. Tomorrow, he would begin experiencing the consequences of those choices, professionally and personally. My phone buzzed with a final text from Robert. "All systems go for tomorrow. Leadership team briefed. You're sure about the timing with your personal matters?" I typed my response without hesitation. Timing confirmed. Professional and personal transitions proceeding as planned. Setting my phone on the nightstand, I slipped between the high thread count sheets and closed my eyes. Tomorrow would mark the beginning of a new chapter. For Pinnacle under Vertex Global's ownership, for me as a CEO, and for Drew as he confronted the reality that the wife he had betrayed was now positioned to determine his professional future. The symmetry wasn't planned, but was nonetheless poetic. Morning arrived with a clarity that matched my state of mind. I rose at 5:30, completed my usual workout routine, and dressed with particular care. A tailored navy suit that conveyed authority, pearl earrings that had been a gift to myself when I made chief investment officer, subtle makeup that enhanced rather than concealed. Today wasn't about confrontation or revenge. Today was about taking my rightful place at the helm of a company I had helped acquire, about leading a transition that would create value for shareholders and opportunities for employees who performed well. That Drew would be witnessing this transition as both my soon-to-be ex-husband and my subordinate was a consequence of his choices, not my objective. My phone buzzed with a confirmation from the courier service. Delivery completed to A. Mitchell at Pinnacle Innovations, 8:47 a.m. Receipt confirmed. Perfect timing. Drew would have just settled into his office, perhaps exchanging morning messages with Olivia, when the divorce papers arrived. He would have approximately 2 hours to process the detailed documentation of his infidelity, the financial implications of violating the prenup, and the clear evidence that his wife had been several steps ahead of him for months. By the time the acquisition announcement began, he would be emotionally off balance, professionally vulnerable, and completely unprepared for the final revelation of my new position. As I drove to Pinnacle's headquarters, I allowed myself a brief moment to picture Drew's face when I walked into that conference room with Robert Chen. The shock, the dawning comprehension, the realization that the woman he had dismissed professionally and betrayed personally now held significant influence over his career. The thought brought not a smile but a sense of rightness, of long overdue correction to a power imbalance Drew had exploited without ever acknowledging its existence. I pulled into Pinnacle's executive parking garage precisely at 9:15, allowing myself 15 minutes to meet privately with Robert before the company-wide announcement at 10:15. The security guard recognized me immediately, despite my absence from company events in recent months. "Good morning, Ms. Mitchell," he said, handing me a visitor badge. "Mr. Chen arrived 5 minutes ago. He asked that you meet him in the executive conference room on the 15th floor." "Thank you, Frank," I replied, taking the badge. I didn't bother to correct him about my last name. By the end of the day, everyone at Pinnacle would understand. The connection between Rebecca Mitchell and Drew Mitchell, and the significant shift in our professional relationship. The elevator ride to the 15th floor gave me a moment to center myself. The weight of the day ahead settled on my shoulders, not as a burden, but as a mantle of authority I had earned through years of strategic decision-making and financial expertise. Today was the culmination of careful planning, both corporate and personal. Robert Chen was waiting in the conference room, reviewing documents with Margaret Wilson, Vertex Global's chief operating officer and my longtime mentor. They both stood. As I entered, Robert extending his hand while Margaret moved forward for a brief hug. "Rebecca," Margaret said warmly, "today is a significant milestone. How are you feeling?" "Prepared," I answered honestly. The integration plan is solid, the financial projections are conservative but promising, and the leadership restructuring addresses the operational redundancies we identified. Robert nodded approvingly. "That's why you're the right choice for this position. Most executives would be focusing on the personal complications given your unique situation. The personal and professional circumstances are separate issues with separate resolution paths," I replied, setting my portfolio on the conference table. "I've compartmentalized accordingly." "And the divorce papers?" Margaret asked quietly. "They've been delivered?" "Confirmed delivery at 8:47 this morning," I said. "Drew has had approximately 40 minutes to begin processing them." Margaret and Robert exchanged glances that mixed admiration with something approaching concern. They both recognized the strategic alignment of the timing, delivering maximum impact while maintaining plausible deniability about any connection between my personal decisions and corporate restructuring. "The executive team is gathering in the main conference room," Robert said, checking his watch. "They've been told only that a major announcement is coming. No details about the acquisition or leadership changes have been shared beyond Pinnacle's CEO and CFO. "And Drew's status update?" I asked, keeping my tone professionally neutral. Margaret consulted her tablet. "Still in his office according to security badge tracking. He requested no interruptions from his assistant about 20 minutes ago, exactly as I had anticipated. Drew would be poring over the divorce papers, likely alternating between shock, anger, and desperate attempts to contact me. The detailed documentation of his affair with Olivia, the financial implications of violating our prenuptial agreement, and the realization that I had disappeared not out of emotional breakdown but calculated strategy would be overwhelming him, precisely when he needed to be professionally focused. "Are the revised organization charts ready for distribution after the announcement?" I asked, deliberately shifting the conversation back to business matters. "Everything's prepared, Robert." "Confirmed." "The integration team has established a command center on the 12th floor. Once the announcement is complete, department heads will be brought in for individual briefings on how their teams will be affected." "The marketing department briefing is scheduled for 2 p.m., Margaret added, watching me carefully. "Would you prefer someone else handle that one?" "That won't be necessary," I replied calmly. "I'll conduct all senior leadership briefings personally, regardless of department. Consistent messaging is crucial during acquisitions." Robert smiled slightly. "As I said, this is why you're the right person for this position." At 9:45, we gathered our materials and made our way to the main conference room where Pinnacle's executive leadership team was assembling. Through the glass walls, I could see familiar faces, the CFO looking resigned, the CTO checking his phone nervously, various department heads whispering among themselves as the energy of anticipation filled the room. Drew was noticeably absent. "Should we wait?" Robert asked quietly as we paused outside the door. "No," I decided. "The announcement proceeds as scheduled. Drew's presence or absence is his own responsibility." As we entered, conversations ceased immediately, all eyes turning to Robert Chen, recognizable to anyone in the industry as Vertex Global's CEO. His presence alone confirmed the rumors of acquisition that had been circulating through industry channels for weeks. We took our positions at the front of the room, Robert center, Margaret and I flanking him on either side. I stood straight, portfolio held confidently against my midsection, expression professionally neutral despite the significance of the moment. James Harrison, Pinnacle's soon-to-be former CEO, entered last and took a position beside Robert. His expression was the practiced mask of an executive who had negotiated his golden parachute months ago and was now simply going through the motions of leadership transition. "Good morning, everyone," Robert began precisely at 10 Brau. "Thank you for adjusting your schedules on short notice. Today marks a significant milestone for both Pinnacle Innovations and Vertex Global." He paused, scanning the room deliberately before continuing. "I'm here to announce that effective immediately, Pinnacle Innovations has been acquired by Vertex Global in a transaction valued at $2.4 billion. This acquisition represents our commitment to expanding our technological capabilities and market reach." The room remained silent, though I noted several executives shifting uncomfortably in their seats. Acquisitions inevitably meant organizational changes, redundancies identified and eliminated, power structures reconfigured. "I want to assure you that this acquisition is not about cost-cutting or asset stripping," Robert continued, addressing the unspoken concerns. "Pinnacle's innovation track record and talent pool are precisely why we pursued this opportunity. We're investing in growth, not contraction." Just as Robert began outlining the strategic rationale for the acquisition, the conference room door opened. Drew entered, his usual confident stride notably absent. His face was pale, his normally perfect appearance slightly disheveled. The divorce papers had clearly had their intended impact. His eyes scanned the room, widening when they landed on me standing at the front beside Robert Chen. I maintained my professional expression, giving no indication of our personal connection or the significance of our eye contact. Drew took the nearest available seat, fumbling with his portfolio and nearly dropping his phone. Several colleagues glanced at him with confusion. the normally polished marketing director suddenly appearing disorganized and distracted. Integration. Planning has been underway for several months, Robert was saying as Drew struggled to compose himself. Today begins the formal transition period, during which we'll be implementing a carefully structured leadership and organizational model to maximize the strengths of both companies. I could feel Drew's eyes on me, questions and confusion evident in his expression. He was trying to reconcile my presence beside Robert Chen with the divorce papers he had received an hour earlier, attempting to connect dots that his shocked mind couldn't yet quite align. Critical to this integration is strong, knowledgeable leadership, Robert continued, turning slightly toward me. Leadership that understands both Pinnacle's unique culture and Vertex Global's strategic vision. That's why I'm pleased to introduce Rebecca Mitchell as the new Chief Executive Officer of Pinnacle Innovations. The room went absolutely still. All eyes turned to me, including Drew's, which had widened in shock. The timing couldn't have been more perfect. The professional revelation landing precisely when he was already emotionally off balance from the personal one. Rebecca comes to this role with exceptional qualifications, Robert continued smoothly. As Vertex Global's Chief Investment Officer, she was instrumental in identifying Pinnacle as an acquisition target and structuring the financial aspects of this transaction. Her background in financial technology and her track record of successful leadership make her the ideal executive to guide Pinnacle through this transition and into its next growth phase. I stepped forward, assuming my position at the center of the room's attention. My voice was steady, my posture confident as I addressed the executives who would now report to me, including my soon-to-be ex-husband, who appeared frozen in his seat. Thank you, Robert. I'm honored to accept this responsibility and excited about the opportunities ahead for Pinnacle as part of the Vertex Global family. I began, making eye contact with various executives around the room while deliberately avoiding Drew's stunned gaze. I recognize that transitions of this nature create uncertainty. That's why we've developed a comprehensive integration plan that prioritizes clear communication, thoughtful organizational alignment, and recognition of the talent that has made Pinnacle successful. I continued outlining my vision for the company's future, emphasizing continuity where appropriate while clearly establishing that changes would be coming. Throughout my presentation, I could feel Drew's eyes boring into me, his expression cycling through confusion, disbelief, and finally dawning comprehension as he put together the timing of my disappearance from our marriage, the delivery of divorce papers, and my appearance as his new CEO. When the formal presentation concluded, Robert opened the floor for questions. The first came from the Chief Technology Officer, asking about product integration timelines. The second from the head of THICE, sales, concerned about potential client overlap. Standard acquisition questions that we had anticipated and prepared for. Then Drew raised his hand, his composure partially recovered, though strain still showed around his eyes. I'm wondering about the marketing department's position in the new structure, given Vertex Global's established marketing team. The question was professionally phrased but carried personal weight that everyone in the room missed except me, Robert, and Margaret. He was really asking, what happens to my position now that my wife, who just served me with divorce papers, is my boss? I met his eyes directly for the first time. An excellent question, Drew. The marketing function is critical to our go-forward strategy. Detailed organizational announcements will be made in department-specific meetings later today. Marketing is scheduled for 2 p.m. in this conference room. I'll be conducting that briefing personally. Drew's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. I had answered his question without answering it, maintaining professional decorum while making it clear he would need to wait. A small taste of the uncertainty he had created in our marriage with his ongoing deception. As the meeting concluded, executives gathered their materials and began filing out, many stopping to congratulate me or introduce themselves more personally. Drew remained seated, clearly waiting for an opportunity to speak with me privately. I deliberately engaged with several other executives, keeping my back to him as I discussed integration questions with the CFO. Robert approached Drew while I was occupied. I couldn't hear their conversation, but Drew's body language shifted, from tension to resignation as Robert spoke. When I finally turned, Drew was gone, and Robert was walking back toward me. I suggested he take the morning to review the integration materials and prepare questions for this afternoon's marketing department briefing, Robert explained quietly. He seemed to need some time to process everything. Thank you, I replied. That was considerate. Considerate of whom? Robert asked with a slight smile. Him or you? The company, I answered professionally. Emotional confrontations have no place in acquisition announcements. Margaret joined us as the room emptied. The command center is operational on 12. Integration team is ready whenever you are. Let's go, I said, gathering my materials. We have 17 department briefings to prepare for, and I want to review the marketing reorganization charts once more before this afternoon. As we walked to the elevator, my phone buzzed with a text from Jennifer. Saw the announcement hit the business wire. How did it go? How did he take it? I typed back quickly. Announcement complete. Drew was caught completely off guard. Professional boundaries maintained. Proceeding with integration as planned. The Integration Command Center occupied what had previously been Pinnacle's training facility, a large open space now filled. With workstations, multiple screens displaying organizational charts and integration timelines, and a team of specialists from both companies working to execute the carefully orchestrated transition plan. For the next 3 hours, I immersed myself completely in the professional aspects of the acquisition, reviewing department structures, approving communication plans, and meeting with the HR transition team about retention packages for key talent. The work provided a productive channel for my energy and a necessary distraction from the inevitable confrontation that would come at the marketing department meeting. At 1:30, I stepped away to prepare for the marketing briefing. The revised organizational chart was straightforward. Marketing would be restructured into 3 specialized teams rather than the generalist approach Drew had implemented. Strategic direction would come from Vertex Global's Chief Marketing Officer, to whom the team leaders would report. Drew's position was being redefined as Director of Brand Strategy, a lateral move that preserved his title and compensation, but significantly reduced his authority and direct reports. The changes weren't punitive. They reflected objective assessment of the department's performance and alignment needs. That they also diminished Drew's professional standing was coincidental, though I wouldn't pretend it was unwelcome. The marketing team is assembling in the main conference room, Margaret informed me at 1:50. Drew is already there. Do you want me to join you for this one? I considered the offer. Having Margaret present would ensure a witness to any potential unprofessional behavior from Drew. However, it might also signal weakness, that I needed protection or support to face my husband professionally. No, but thank you for offering, I decided. I'll handle it directly. Margaret nodded, respect evident in her expression. Integration team will be standing by if you need anything. Legal has also prepared responses to any potential claims of conflict of interest or personal bias in the restructuring decisions. Those won't be necessary, I said confidently. The marketing reorganization is supported by performance data and alignment requirements. The personal situation is irrelevant to the business decision. I gathered the presentation materials and made my way back to the conference room. Through the glass walls, I could see the marketing team assembled. 15 professionals looking variously concerned, curious, and resigned as they awaited news of their department's fate. Drew sat at the far end of the table, his posture rigid, eyes fixed on the doorway as I approached. Taking a deep breath, I pushed open the door and entered with the confident stride I had perfected over years of high-stakes financial presentations. The room fell silent immediately. "Good afternoon, everyone," I began, setting up my materials at the head of the table. "For those I haven't met personally, I'm Rebecca Mitchell, Pinnacle's new CEO following the acquisition by Vertex Global, announced this morning. I deliberately didn't acknowledge any connection to Drew, whose gaze I could feel burning into me from the other end of the table. Several team members glanced between us with dawning recognition of our shared last name, whispers barely audible, as they made the connection. I understand transitions create uncertainty, I continued smoothly. My goal today is to provide clarity about the marketing department's position in our go-forward organization and answer your questions about what to expect in the coming weeks. I launched into the presentation, outlining the strategic rationale for the restructuring, the new reporting lines, and the specialized team model that would replace the current structure. Throughout, I maintained professional detachment, discussing organizational changes that would significantly impact Drew's position while never directly addressing him or acknowledging our personal connection. The restructuring will be implemented over the next 30 days, I explained, displaying the transition timeline. During this period, you'll each have individual meetings with HR to discuss your specific role, reporting line, and any changes to your responsibilities. Drew finally spoke, his voice controlled but tight. The organizational chart shows 3 team lead positions reporting to Vertex's CMO. Who will be leading those teams? It was a legitimate business question with obvious personal implications. I answered directly. We're evaluating internal candidates from both Pinnacle and Vertex for those positions. Selections will be based on expertise alignment, performance history, and leadership capabilities. Announcements will be made next week following completion of the assessment process. Drew's jaw tightened. He knew he was unlikely to be selected, given his recent performance metrics, which had been declining over the past 2 quarters, coincidentally aligning with the intensification of his relationship with Olivia. And the Director of Brand Strategy position? He asked, referring to his own reassignment without explicitly acknowledging it. That role will focus on maintaining brand consistency across product lines, while implementing the strategic direction established by the CMO, I replied. It's a specialized position leveraging existing brand equity, while adapting to our expanded market position. The careful corporate language masked the reality. The position represented a significant reduction in authority and influence, transforming him from department leader to specialized individual contributor. The compensation remained the same, making it difficult to claim constructive dismissal, but the professional demotion was clear to everyone in the room. As I concluded the formal presentation and opened the floor for questions, the marketing team's focus shifted to practical concerns. Would they keep their current clients? How would team assignments be determined? What systems would they be expected to use going forward? I answered each question with the detailed knowledge that comes from months of integration planning, further establishing my command of both the acquisition process and Pinnacle's operations. Throughout the discussion, Drew remained largely silent, making occasional notes and studying me with an intensity that might have been unsettling had I not anticipated it. When the meeting concluded, most team members filed out with expressions ranging from cautious optimism to resignation, standard reactions to acquisition announcements. Drew, as expected, remained seated. I deliberately gathered my materials slowly, giving other team members time to clear the room before the inevitable confrontation. When the last person left, closing the door behind them, Drew finally spoke. "So this is why you disappeared. You knew about the acquisition." "Yes," I confirmed, continuing to organize my presentation materials rather than meeting his gaze. "And the divorce papers this morning. The timing was deliberate. Maximum impact before the announcement." I looked up then, meeting his eyes. Directly. Efficiency. Why make 2 difficult conversations when one could achieve both objectives? Drew stood, moving closer, but still maintaining a professional distance. "You've been planning this for months. The disappearance, the divorce, the position. It was all calculated." "Yes," I acknowledged again. "Much like your relationship with Olivia was calculated. The late nights, the The business trips, the text, messages at 11 p.m. that were supposedly about urgent client needs. We've both been making strategic decisions, Drew. The difference is, I made mine with complete information while you operated under the delusion that I remained ignorant. His face flushed slightly at the reference to Olivia. That's a personal matter that has nothing to do with this acquisition or your decision to accept this position. Correct, I agreed calmly. The acquisition decision was based on financial projections, market synergies, and growth potential. My acceptance of the CEO position was based on professional qualifications and strategic alignment. The timing of our personal separation was a separate consideration. You could have declined the position given our relationship, Drew argued, his professional demeanor slipping as frustration seeped through. There's a clear conflict of interest. There would have been had I remained your wife, I corrected him. As your soon-to-be ex-wife with documented cause for divorce, the potential conflict is substantially mitigated. The legal team has reviewed the situation thoroughly and established appropriate governance protocols. Drew ran a hand through his hair, a gesture I recognized from our marriage as indicating growing agitation. And my position? The convenient demotion to a role with no authority or advancement potential? That had nothing to do with our personal situation? Your department's performance metrics for the past 2 quarters speak for themselves, I replied, sliding a data sheet across the table. Client retention down 12%, campaign effectiveness measures below target by 17%, budget overruns on 3 major initiatives. The restructuring decision is supported by objective business criteria. Drew glanced at the performance data, then back at me. You know those numbers were impacted by the Johnson account loss, which was due to their internal budget cuts, not our performance. Even excluding the Johnson account, the metrics show a clear downward trend beginning approximately 8 months ago, I noted, coincidentally aligning with when your late nights with Olivia became a regular occurrence. The personal observation slipped into the professional discussion, revealing the faintest crack in my composed facade. I immediately recalibrated. However, that correlation is irrelevant to the business decision, I continued more formally. The restructuring plans were developed by an integration team using standardized evaluation criteria applied consistently across all departments. Drew's expression shifted, anger giving way to something closer to defensive calculation. And what happens when I decline the new position? When I leave and share how my soon-to-be ex-wife orchestrated my professional demotion concurrent with serving divorce papers? That would be your prerogative, I acknowledged, maintaining eye contact. Though I'd recommend consulting legal counsel before making public allegations that could be construed as defamatory. The documentation supporting both the divorce proceedings and the restructuring decisions is quite comprehensive. I gathered my materials and stood to leave. The HR transition team will be reaching out to schedule your role discussion. I suggest taking the weekend to review the integration materials and consider your options objectively. Professional decisions, made emotionally, rarely yield optimal outcomes. As I moved toward the door, Drew called after me. Was any of it real, Rebecca? Our marriage, our plans, the life we built? Or was everything just another strategic transaction for you? I paused, hand on the door handle. The question pierced through my professional armor, touching the personal wound I had worked so hard to compartmentalize. For a moment, I considered walking out without answering, maintaining the perfect professional boundary I had established. Instead, I turned back. It was real for me, Drew. Completely real. I loved you, supported your ambitions, celebrated your successes as if they were my own. That's why your betrayal required such a thorough response. You didn't just cheat on your wife, you undermined a partnership I believed in absolutely. Something flickered in his expression, recognition perhaps of the depth of what he had destroyed, or maybe just surprise at the emotion finally showing through my carefully maintained facade. The divorce settlement is fair despite the prenups. Infidelity clause, I continued, my voice steady again. The professional restructuring is based on performance data and integration requirements. Neither is designed to destroy you, Drew. They simply establish appropriate consequences for choices you made knowingly and repeatedly. Without waiting for his response, I opened the door and stepped into the hallway, closing it firmly behind me. Only then did I allow myself a deep breath, centering my emotions before heading back to the Integration Command Center where Margaret waited. "How did it go?" she asked, studying my expression carefully. "As expected," I replied, my professional composure fully restored. The team had standard integration concerns. Drew raised questions about his repositioning that were addressed with performance data. Margaret nodded, respecting my obvious preference to keep personal details private. "The afternoon briefings are scheduled to begin in 20 minutes. Finance is next." "Perfect," I said, accepting the folder she handed me with the finance department materials. "Let's continue with the integration as planned." For the remainder of the day, I immersed myself in the acquisition process, conducting department briefings, addressing escalated concerns, and reviewing progress with the integration team. The work provided welcome structure and purpose, keeping me firmly anchored in my professional identity as the personal implications of the day's events attempted to surface. At 7:30 p.m., with the initial announcement day activities complete, I gathered my things to leave. The executive floor was quiet, most employees having departed hours earlier to process the day's news or celebrate or commiserate at nearby bars, the standard response to major corporate announcements. As I waited for the elevator, Robert approached from the Integration Command Center. "Remarkable first day," he observed. "The team is impressed with how smoothly the announcements proceeded." "Thank you," I replied. "The preparation was thorough." "And the personal situation?" he asked cautiously. "That appeared to be managed with equal discipline." "It was addressed appropriately," I confirmed without elaboration. Robert studied me for a moment. "You don't need to be in tomorrow. The integration team can handle the weekend transition activities." "I'll be here," I said firmly. Consistent. Leadership presence is crucial during the first 72 hours post-announcement. The elevator arrived, and I stepped in, ending the conversation naturally. As the doors closed, I allowed my shoulders to relax slightly for the first time since entering the building that morning. Day one of the new professional and personal reality was complete. The carefully orchestrated plan had unfolded almost exactly as anticipated. As I drove to my downtown apartment, I received a text from Jennifer. "Dinner? You shouldn't be alone tonight." I considered the offer. Jennifer's company would provide welcome distraction, and she would understand both the professional and personal dimensions of the day without requiring extensive explanation. "Yes," I texted back. "The usual place at 8:30? "Already reserved our table," came the immediate response. At the restaurant, Jennifer was waiting with a glass of wine already poured for me. Her expression held curiosity, but also concern as I took my seat across from her. "So," she said simply, "you're officially CEO of the company where your cheating husband works on the same day you served him divorce papers. That has to be some kind of power move record." Despite everything, I found myself smiling slightly at her characteristic directness. The timing was efficient. "Efficient," Jennifer repeated, shaking her head with a mixture of admiration and disbelief. "Only you would describe one of the most emotionally and professionally complex days imaginable as efficient." I took a sip of wine, allowing myself to relax marginally now that I was away from Pinnacle and with someone who knew the complete situation. The alternative was messy, protracted, and ultimately less effective. Drew needed to understand the comprehensive consequences of his choices. "And did he?" Jennifer asked. "Understand, I mean." I considered the question, remembering Drew's expression in those final moments of our conversation. the dawning comprehension of exactly what his betrayal had cost him, professionally and personally. "I believe he's beginning to," I answered. "Though understanding and acceptance are different psychological processes, he'll likely cycle through various rationalizations before reaching the latter." Jennifer leaned forward, her legal mind obviously processing potential scenarios. "What happens now? With the divorce, with his position, with the obvious complications of you being his boss's boss?" "The divorce proceeds as filed," I replied. "The prenuptial agreement is clear regarding infidelity. His legal options are limited given the evidence. As for his position, he has 3 choices. Accept the repositioned role and demonstrate value in that capacity. Resign and seek opportunities elsewhere. Or attempt to challenge the restructuring on grounds of personal bias. Which do you think he'll choose?" I considered Drew's character, his pride, his career ambitions. Initially, he'll explore legal options for challenging both the divorce terms and the repositioning. When those prove limited, he'll likely resign rather than accept the reduced role. "And if he does stay? Can you effectively manage a company where your ex-husband works in a department you essentially demoted him to?" "Yes," I said without hesitation. "The governance protocols established with legal counsel create appropriate separation in reporting lines and performance evaluation. My decisions regarding the marketing department will be reviewed by Robert and the board to ensure objectivity." Jennifer studied me over her wine glass. "You've thought of everything, haven't you? Every contingency, every potential challenge." "I've had months to prepare," I replied, the phrase becoming something of a mantra. "And emotionally?" Jennifer pressed gently. "You've managed the professional and legal aspects with characteristic thoroughness, but what about the personal? Impact? 11 years of marriage doesn't disappear behind CEO authority, no matter how deserved that position is." The question touched precisely the area I had so carefully compartmentalized. For a moment, I considered deflecting with another reference to efficiency or strategic planning. Instead, I allowed myself a rare moment of vulnerability with my oldest friend. "The marriage was over the moment I confirmed the affair," I admitted quietly. "Today simply made it official in multiple dimensions: the emotion, the grief, the anger, the sense of betrayal. I processed those feelings months ago, privately and thoroughly." "And now?" Jennifer asked. "What are you feeling right now, after this day?" I considered the question carefully. "Completion," I finally answered. Not satisfaction or vindication, but the sense that a necessary process has reached its conclusion. Drew made choices that ended our marriage and compromised his professional standing. Today, those choices met their natural consequences. Jennifer nodded, accepting my answer without pushing further. She knew me well enough to recognize the boundaries of my willingness to discuss emotional matters, even with her. "To completion, then," she said, raising her glass, "and to new beginnings, as CEO, as a soon-to-be single woman, and as someone who refused to be diminished by betrayal." I raised my glass in response, allowing myself to acknowledge the truth in her words. Today had indeed been an ending. Of my marriage, of Drew's understanding of our power dynamic, of a chapter in both our lives. But it was also a beginning, professionally and personally, built on the solid foundation of knowing exactly what I was worth and what I was capable of achieving. Drew had underestimated both, repeatedly and fundamentally. That miscalculation had cost him everything he claimed to value: his marriage, his professional standing, his carefully constructed image of success. The symmetry wasn't planned, but was nonetheless fitting. Tomorrow would bring new challenges: integration milestones, team consolidations, market communications about the acquisition. I would face them with the same strategic clarity and emotional discipline that had guided me through today. The personal and professional threads had intersected briefly, necessarily, but would now proceed on separate tracks toward their respective resolutions. As Jennifer and I discussed other topics over dinner, I felt the weight of the day gradually lifting. The plan had been executed. The transition was underway. Both Pinnacle Innovations and my personal life were moving forward according to carefully structured designs of my creation. Drew had chosen to replace me with Olivia in the most intimate aspect of life. I had chosen to replace him professionally with more qualified leadership. We had each exercised our agency and would now live with the respective outcomes. That his consequences were more comprehensive than mine was not my objective, but was nonetheless appropriate given our relative choices. Later that night, as I looked out at the Boston skyline from my apartment windows, I allowed myself a moment of quiet acknowledgement. The girl who had grown up in a household where her mother's financial dependence had trapped her in an unhappy marriage had become a woman who had built her life on independence, competence, and clear-eyed assessment of both professional and personal value. Drew had never truly seen that woman. He had married the successful professional he could display at networking events, but had never fully comprehended the strategic mind and unwavering principles that drove her success. That fundamental misunderstanding had led him to believe he could betray our marriage without significant consequence. Today had corrected that misperception definitively. My phone buzzed with a text from Margaret. Integration dashboard updated. All day, 1 milestones complete. Excellent first day as CEO. I typed back a simple acknowledgement, then set my phone aside. Tomorrow would begin the real work of leading Pinnacle through its transition into Vertex Global, work I was uniquely qualified to perform, given my understanding of both companies. That Drew would be watching this leadership from his significantly diminished position was not the point of accepting the role, but it provided a certain poetic balance to the story. We had written together and would now conclude separately. The weekend brought no respite from the acquisition's momentum. I arrived at Pinnacle's offices by 7 on Saturday morning, determined to maintain the integration timeline despite the personal complications that had emerged. The building was quieter than usual, but not empty. The integration team occupied. The 12th floor command center and various department leaders had come in to review transition materials before Monday's full implementation began. Margaret was already in the command center when I arrived, reviewing staffing alignment charts with Michael Taylor from HR. "Morning," she greeted me, sliding a coffee cup across the table as I set down my portfolio. Systems integration team encountered some compatibility issues with the customer database overnight. They're working on solutions, but we may need to extend the data migration timeline. "Unacceptable," I replied, taking the coffee gratefully. "The client experience needs to remain seamless throughout the transition. What's the specific issue?" Michael pulled up a technical diagram on his tablet. Pinnacle's proprietary tagging system doesn't translate cleanly to Vertex's customer categories. The engineering team is building a translation layer, but it's proving more complex than anticipated. I studied the diagram, quickly identifying the core problem. Have them isolate the marketing automation components from the core customer data. We can run parallel systems for the automation functions while ensuring the primary customer information transfers correctly. Margaret made a note. That could work. I'll get the technical lead up here to discuss implementation. The morning proceeded in a blur of technical decisions, staffing alignments, and integration checkpoints. I deliberately immersed myself in the operational details, finding comfort in the clear metrics and objective decisions of corporate integration. Here, success and failure had measurable definitions, unlike the murky territory of personal relationships, where betrayal could hide behind reassurances and commitments could dissolve into deception. Around 11, Michael approached with an update on the employee transition meetings. We've scheduled one-on-ones with all affected staff for Monday and Tuesday. Most are straightforward role confirmations or minor adjustments. And the more significant changes? I asked, though I already knew which name would be mentioned. Drew Mitchell's session is scheduled for Monday at 10 a.m., Michael confirmed, watching me carefully. Given the complexity of that situation, would you prefer someone from Vertex's HR team handle it instead of me? I considered the question. Having Drew's repositioning discussion conducted by an HR person from Vertex would create additional professional distance. However, it might also appear that I was avoiding appropriate involvement in a significant personnel matter. Who would normally conduct a session for someone at Drew's level? I asked. Typically, the department head and HR business partner together, Michael answered. In this case, that would be the incoming CMO and myself. Then proceed with that. Structure, I decided. We'll maintain standard protocols throughout the integration, regardless of personal connections. Michael nodded, his expression revealing both respect and concern. The legal team prepared additional documentation regarding the performance-based nature of the restructuring decision. Should there be any questions about potential conflicts of interest? Appropriate preparation, I acknowledged, though I believe the performance metrics speak for themselves. I turned my attention back to the integration dashboard, effectively ending the conversation. Michael recognized the dismissal and moved on to his next task, leaving me to continue reviewing department consolidation plans. Just before noon, my phone buzzed with a text from Drew. We need to talk, privately. Not about us, about Olivia's transfer to Seattle. It's clearly punitive and you know it. I stared at the message, feeling a flash of irritation at his presumption. After a moment of consideration, I typed back, personnel decisions are not open for negotiation. HR is available to discuss transition support for all affected employees. His response came immediately. This isn't about personnel decisions. This is about you using corporate restructuring to separate us. She's being sent 3,000 miles away with 2 weeks' notice. I set the phone down without responding. The decision to transfer Olivia to the Seattle office had been made by the integration team based on legitimate business needs. The West Coast expansion required experienced staff, and Olivia's skills matched their requirements. That it also removed her from daily contact with Drew was a secondary effect that I hadn't actively engineered, but certainly hadn't opposed. Everything okay? Margaret asked, noting my expression as I set the phone down perhaps more firmly than necessary. Fine, I replied, refocusing on the work at hand. Where are we with the client communication plan? For the next several hours, I channeled my energy into finalizing the Monday rollout plans, reviewing department integration, schedules, and preparing for the all-hands meeting where I would address Pinnacle's employees as their CEO for the first time. The work provided purpose and structure, keeping personal considerations firmly compartmentalized. At 3, Robert Chen arrived for our scheduled update meeting. We moved to a small conference room adjacent to the command center, away from the constant activity of the integration team. The board is pleased with the progress so far, he noted as we reviewed the dashboard metrics. Day 1 announcements went smoother than anticipated, and weekend milestone completion is tracking at 92% against targets. We should be at 98% by end of day, I replied. The customer database integration had some technical complications, but they've been addressed. Robert nodded, then set his tablet aside. And the personal situation? Any developments I should be aware of? Drew has expressed concerns about Olivia Parker's transfer to Seattle, I said, maintaining professional detachment. He appears to believe the decision was personal rather than operational. HR has been briefed and has documentation supporting the business rationale. Is there any merit to his concern? Robert asked directly. I met his gaze steadily. The transfer decision was made by the integration team based on Seattle's staffing needs and Ms. Parker's qualifications. I was aware of the recommendation but did not initiate it or intervene to ensure its implementation. But you didn't oppose it either, Robert observed, not as an accusation but as a statement of fact. No, I acknowledged. The business justification was sound, and I saw no reason to override the team's recommendation. Robert considered this. Will Drew accept the repositioning? Unlikely, I replied honestly. His options are limited. The performance data supports the restructuring decision, and challenging it would require proving inappropriate personal influence despite the documented business rationale. However, his pride will likely prevent him from accepting the reduced role. You think he'll resign? Yes, probably after exploring legal options regarding both the divorce and the repositioning. When those prove limited, resignation will allow him to maintain some sense of agency in the narrative. Robert studied me for a moment. You've thought this through very thoroughly. It's my job to anticipate scenarios and prepare accordingly, I replied simply. Yes, it is, he agreed, though usually those scenarios involve market reactions and competitor responses, not ex-husband behavior prediction. I allowed myself a small, professional smile. The analytical approach applies across contexts. Robert laughed softly. Indeed it does. And that's exactly why you're the right person for this position, complicated personal situation notwithstanding. We returned to discussing the integration metrics, the conversation shifting back to the comfortable territory of business operations and organizational alignment. When Robert left an hour later, I remained in the command center, working through staffing models and communication plans until well into the evening. Around 8, most of the integration team had departed, leaving me alone with the sprawling charts and transition timelines. My phone buzzed again with a text from Jennifer. Checking in. How are you doing? I considered the question. How was I doing? Professionally, exceptionally well. The integration was proceeding on schedule. My authority as CEO was being established effectively, and the transition metrics looked promising. Personally, I typed back, managing, focused on the integration. Drew texted about Olivia's transfer. I didn't engage. Jennifer's response came quickly. Good. Have you been back to the house? The question caught me off guard. In the intensity of the acquisition announcement and integration planning, I hadn't given much thought to the Cambridge townhouse I'd shared with Drew. I'd been living in my downtown apartment for 4 weeks, with everything I needed for my daily life. The house contained the rest of my belongings, but also the physical manifestation of a marriage that no longer existed. No, I replied. No immediate need. You might want to secure any remaining important items, Jennifer advised. Once the reality of the divorce and repositioning fully registers, you can't predict how he'll react. She had a point. While Drew had never been destructive or vindictive during our marriage, people often revealed different aspects of themselves when facing significant loss, of relationship, of professional standing, of their perception of control. I'll go tomorrow, I decided, typing the commitment to Jennifer before I could reconsider. With that decided, I gathered my things and prepared to leave. The integration would proceed through the night with the technical team's continuing system, migrations, but my presence was no longer necessary until morning. As I drove to my apartment, I allowed my thoughts to drift toward the house, the space Drew and I had carefully renovated together, the home that had once represented our shared future. I hadn't been inside since the morning I left 4 weeks ago, taking only what I needed for my temporary disappearance. The calculated absence had been designed to give Drew the false impression of emotional distress, allowing me time to finalize the acquisition details while he believed I was simply processing our failing marriage. It had worked perfectly, creating the leverage necessary for the maximum impact of Friday's revelations. Now, however, I needed to return not as part of a strategic plan, but to address the practical matter of securing my remaining possessions. The thought brought an unexpected heaviness, an acknowledgement that this represented yet another step in dismantling the life we had built together. Sunday morning dawned clear and cool, typical Boston spring weather that would normally have Drew and me planning a walk along the Charles River. Instead, I dressed in casual clothes, jeans and a lightweight sweater so different from my professional armor, and prepared to visit what had once been our home. I had timed my visit deliberately. Drew typically played racquetball on Sunday mornings, a routine so established that I could predict his absence with near certainty. This would allow me to retrieve my belongings without the complication of a confrontation. As I pulled into the driveway of the Cambridge townhouse, however, I was surprised to see Drew's Audi still parked in its usual spot. My fingers tightened on the steering wheel as I considered my options: proceed despite his presence, return another time, or call to arrange a formal property division later. Before I could decide, the front door opened and Drew stepped out, clearly having heard my car arrive. He was dressed casually, coffee mug in hand, expression cautious but not hostile. I took a deep breath and exited my car, maintaining a composed exterior despite the unexpected change to my plan. "I thought you'd be at racquetball," I said by way of greeting, stopping at a comfortable distance. "Cancelled," he replied simply. "Didn't feel much like socializing this weekend." An awkward silence stretched between us, the familiar territory of our shared home now feeling like contested ground. Finally, Drew spoke again. "Are you here for your things?" "Some of them," I confirmed. "Personal items primarily." He nodded, stepping aside from the doorway. "I haven't touched anything in your office or closet." The acknowledgement was unexpected, a small courtesy I hadn't anticipated given the circumstances. I moved past him into the house, immediately, struck by the familiar scent of the sandalwood candles I had always kept in the entryway. The space looked exactly as I had left it 4 weeks ago, eerily preserved as if time had stopped the moment I walked out. "Would you like coffee?" Drew asked, following me inside but maintaining distance. "I just made a fresh pot." "No, thank you," I replied, my voice sounding strange in the space that had once been filled with our easy conversation. "I won't be long." I moved through the living room toward the stairs, noting small changes that revealed Drew's life without me. A different arrangement of the remotes on the coffee table, a jacket draped over the arm of the sofa rather than hung in the closet, wine glasses in, the sink that hadn't been there when I left. I wondered briefly if they were from Olivia's visits, but pushed the thought aside. That detail was no longer relevant to my life. In our bedroom, Drew's bedroom now, I found everything untouched on my side. My jewelry box remained on the dresser, my books stacked on the nightstand, my reading glasses exactly where I had left them. I gathered these items methodically, placing them in the tote bag I had brought. Drew appeared in the doorway as I was collecting the last of my toiletries from the bathroom. "You can take whatever you want," he said. "It's all yours anyway." The comment carried an undertone I couldn't quite identify. Not quite bitterness, not quite resignation, but something in between. I paused, toiletry bag in hand. "The property division is outlined in the divorce filing," I noted neutrally. "We can arrange for professional movers to handle the larger items once the agreement is finalized." Drew leaned against the doorframe, studying me with an intensity that felt uncomfortable after weeks of separation. Always so organized, so precise about everything. I didn't respond to the observation, continuing to gather my personal items with methodical efficiency. The sooner I completed this task, the sooner I could leave this lingering reminder of what we had lost, or more accurately, what Drew had destroyed through his choices. "Did you know about the acquisition when we first started having problems?" he asked suddenly. "Was that why you became so distant last year?" The question caught me off guard. "No," I answered truthfully. "The acquisition discussions began 3 months ago. Our issues predated that significantly." "When did you know you'd be taking the CEO position?" I considered how much to share, then opted for simple truth. 2 months ago, Robert approached me after the initial acquisition framework was established. Drew nodded slowly, processing this information. "And you immediately saw it as an opportunity to complete whatever revenge scenario you'd been planning." "It wasn't About revenge, I corrected him, zipping my toiletry bag closed with perhaps more force than necessary. The position aligned with my professional qualifications and career trajectory. The timing relative to our personal situation was coincidental, if convenient. Drew laughed without humor. Convenient. That's one way to describe serving divorce papers to your husband, hours before being announced as his new boss. I turned to face him directly. Would you have preferred I declined a significant career advancement opportunity because it might make my unfaithful husband uncomfortable? That would be quite a courtesy extended to someone who showed so little regard for our marriage. The words came out sharper than I'd intended, revealing an edge of the hurt I'd worked so hard to process privately. Drew's expression shifted, something like genuine regret flickering across his features. "I never meant to hurt you, Rebecca," he said quietly. "What happened with Olivia? It wasn't planned. It just developed over time." "Most betrayals aren't planned," I replied, my voice steadier now. "They're the result of small choices made repeatedly, each one seeming insignificant until they collectively create irreversible damage." I moved past him into the bedroom, gathering the last of my jewelry from the dresser. Drew remained in the bathroom doorway, watching me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "We could have worked through it," he said finally. "If you'd confronted me when you first suspected, if we'd talked about the problems in our marriage instead of you just disappearing and orchestrating this corporate takeover." I closed the jewelry box with a definitive click. "We had talked about the problems in our marriage, Drew. For years. You consistently prioritized your ego over our partnership. You resented my successes instead of celebrating them. You created distance when I received promotions instead of supporting my advancement. Olivia wasn't the cause of our problems. She was simply your chosen solution to your discomfort with our shifting dynamic." Drew flinched slightly at the assessment. "That's not fair. I always supported your career." "When it didn't overshadow yours," I clarified. "When my success could be framed as complementary to yours rather than exceeding it. The problems began long before Olivia entered the picture." I picked up my tote bag, now filled with the essential personal items I had come to retrieve. "The rest can be divided according to the settlement agreement. I'll have my lawyer contact yours to arrange for movers." Drew stepped aside as I moved toward the hallway, but he spoke again before I could reach the stairs. "And the repositioning at Pinnacle? My demotion and Olivia's transfer to Seattle? Were those also not about revenge?" I paused, turning back to face him. "The restructuring. Decisions were based on performance metrics and integration requirements. Your department has underperformed for 2 consecutive quarters, and Olivia's skills are needed for the West Coast expansion. The business justification is documented and would stand regardless of our personal history." "Convenient justification," Drew said, echoing my earlier phrasing with clear skepticism. "The difference is that I can prove my assertion with data," I replied calmly. "Your performance metrics tell an objective story that has nothing to do with our marriage or its dissolution." He studied me for a long moment. "You've really thought of everything, haven't you? Every angle covered, every potential challenge anticipated." "I've had months to prepare," I said simply, the now familiar phrase encapsulating the careful planning that had gone into both my personal exit and professional advancement. "Will you accept my resignation if I offer it?" Drew asked, his voice quieter now. "Or do you want the satisfaction of having me report up through your organization, diminished and reminded daily of what I lost?" The question was more perceptive than I had expected, touching on an aspect of the situation I hadn't fully acknowledged even to myself. Would I prefer Drew to resign, creating a clean break professionally as well as personally? Or did some part of me want him to remain at Pinnacle, witnessing my leadership success from his reduced position? "I want what's best for the company," I answered finally. "If you can contribute value in the repositioned role, there's a place for you. If you can't separate personal history from professional responsibilities, your resignation would be accepted, without prejudice. Drew nodded slowly, always the perfect corporate answer. It's the truth, I insisted. Whatever personal satisfaction I might feel about our changed dynamic is irrelevant to the business decision. I've compartmentalized accordingly. That's what scares me, Drew said softly. Your ability to compartmentalize everything, our marriage, my mistakes, your feelings, all of it filed away in perfectly labeled mental folders. I never knew how to reach the parts of you that weren't so precisely controlled. The observation struck closer than I would have liked, touching on criticisms Drew had raised during our marriage, that I was too reserved, too measured, too unwilling to reveal vulnerability, that I approached our relationship with the same analytical precision I brought to financial projections and corporate strategy. Perhaps if you'd tried harder to understand those parts instead of seeking someone who required less effort to connect with, we wouldn't be having this conversation, I replied, unable to keep the edge from my voice. Drew didn't respond immediately, his expression shifting to something that looked almost like genuine regret. When he finally spoke, his voice had lost its defensive tone. I'm sorry, Rebecca. Not just for Olivia, but for failing to appreciate what we had. For resenting your success instead of being proud of it. For not being the partner you deserved. The unexpected apology caught me off guard. I had anticipated anger, defensiveness, perhaps even threats. Not this quiet acknowledgement of his failures. For a moment, I felt the careful compartmentalization that had protected me through this process begin to waver. It's too late for that now, I said finally, my voice steadier than I felt. We've both made our choices, and we'll proceed accordingly. I turned and descended the stairs, moving through the living room toward the front door. Drew followed at a distance, stopping in the entryway as I prepared to leave. Will you accept my resignation on Monday? He asked again. I paused with my hand on the doorknob. That depends on whether you're resigning because you can't contribute value in the repositioned role, or because your pride won't allow you to report through an organization I lead. Does the distinction matter? Drew challenged. It matters to me, I admitted. One reason reflects a business assessment, the other a personal limitation. I'd prefer to believe you're capable of the former rather than constrained by the latter. Drew considered this. I'll let you know tomorrow then. I nodded and opened the door, stepping out into the spring morning that felt both familiar and strange. As I placed my tote bag in the trunk of my car, Drew spoke once more from the doorway. For what it's worth, you'll be an exceptional CEO. That part of this situation is absolutely right, whatever else went wrong between us. The acknowledgement was unexpected, a professional courtesy extended despite our personal conflict. I nodded in acknowledgement before getting into my car and driving away, leaving behind the home that had once represented our shared future. As I merged onto the highway toward downtown Boston, I realized my hands were shaking slightly on the steering wheel. The encounter had been more affecting than I had anticipated, Drew's apology and professional acknowledgement creating small cracks in the emotional armor I had built around this situation. I had expected recrimination, defensiveness, perhaps even threats, prepared for those reactions with documentation, legal safeguards, and professional distance. I hadn't prepared for genuine regret or for the possibility that Drew might actually recognize his role in our collective failure. By the time I reached my apartment, I had regained my composure, filing the conversation away in its appropriate mental compartment, just as Drew had observed I would. The personal aspects would be processed later, privately. For now, I needed to refocus on the integration activities scheduled for the afternoon and the all-hands meeting preparation for Monday morning. My phone buzzed with a text from Margaret. Technical integration complete. All systems functional. Ready for full employee transition tomorrow. I typed a brief acknowledgement, then set my tote bag aside and opened my laptop. The integration dashboard showed all weekend milestones complete, or on track. with employee communication materials finalized and department transition meetings scheduled. Whatever personal complications remained with Drew, the acquisition was proceeding exactly as planned. Later that evening, as I reviewed my presentation for Monday's all-hands meeting, my phone buzzed with an email notification. Drew had sent a message to both me and Michael Taylor in HR. After careful consideration, I am submitting my resignation from Pinnacle Innovations, effective 2 weeks from today. While I appreciate the opportunity to continue with the company in the restructured organization, I believe a clean break would be best for all parties given the circumstances. I will work with the transition team to ensure a smooth handover of my responsibilities and client relationships. The resignation was professionally worded, without reference to our personal situation or implied criticism of the restructuring decision. It was, in many ways, the most dignified outcome, allowing Drew to exit on his own terms while sparing both of us the ongoing complexity of working within the same organization. I forwarded the email to Robert with a brief note. Drew has resigned. Transition plan in place. No anticipated disruption to integration timeline. Robert's response came quickly. Accepted. Cleaner this way for everyone. You anticipated this outcome correctly. Yes, I had. From the moment I accepted the CEO position, I had expected Drew would ultimately resign rather than adapt to the new reality. His pride wouldn't allow him to remain in a diminished role, particularly in an organization led by the wife he had betrayed. The resignation was the logical conclusion to the scenario that had begun the moment he first stayed late, with Olivia. I closed my laptop and moved to the windows of my apartment, looking out at the Boston skyline illuminated against the night sky. Tomorrow would mark the formal beginning of my leadership at Pinnacle, addressing the full employee base for the first time as their CEO. It would also mark the beginning of the end of Drew's career there, the start of his 2-week notice period before he departed completely. Our professional and personal lives had intersected briefly, necessarily, during this transition. Now they would diverge again. Me ascending to the leadership position I had earned through years of strategic excellence. Drew starting over somewhere new, both of us moving forward separately. As I prepared for bed, I allowed myself to acknowledge a truth I had kept carefully compartmentalized. Beneath the strategic planning and professional execution, there remained a core of genuine hurt. At Drew's betrayal, the calculated response had been necessary and appropriate, but it hadn't erased the pain of discovering that the man I had built a life with had chosen someone else, had violated our trust in the most fundamental way. The hurt would fade with time. The professional advancement would remain, earned through capability rather than orchestrated as revenge. In the end, Drew's choices had cost him far more than they had cost me. His marriage, his position, his carefully constructed self-image as the successful husband of an equally successful wife. My phone buzzed one last time before I turned it off for the night. Jennifer had texted. Saw Drew's resignation email. You called it exactly. How are you feeling? I considered the question carefully, searching for the precise truth rather than the expected answer. Validated professionally, I replied finally. Still processing. Personally, the house visit was more difficult than anticipated. Jennifer's response was immediate and characteristic. That's because you're human, not just a strategic mastermind. Both can be true simultaneously. Get some rest. Tomorrow you start officially running the show. She was right, of course. Tomorrow, I would stand before Pinnacle's employees as their CEO, outlining a vision for the future that had nothing to do with my personal history and everything to do with my professional capabilities. I would lead the organization through its integration with Vertex Global, creating new opportunities and addressing challenges with the same strategic clarity that had guided my career advancement. The personal aspects, the ended marriage, the lingering emotions, the occasional moments when compartmentalization failed, those would be managed privately. processed gradually as I built a new life independent of the partnership Drew had chosen to discard. As I drifted toward sleep, I found myself returning to Drew's observation about my ability to compartmentalize, to separate emotions from strategy, personal hurt from professional advancement. He had framed it as a limitation, a barrier to connection. Perhaps there was truth in that assessment, but that same capacity had also protected me when he betrayed our marriage, had allowed me to channel the energy of that betrayal into professional advancement rather than destructive reaction. In the end, we had each leveraged our essential natures. Drew's charm and emotional fluidity had drawn Olivia to him, creating the affair that ended our marriage. My strategic thinking and emotional discipline had created a response that protected my interests while establishing appropriate consequences for his choices. Tomorrow would begin the next chapter for both of us, separate stories proceeding from the conclusion of our shared narrative. Drew would rebuild elsewhere, perhaps having learned something from the comprehensive consequences of his choices. I would lead Pinnacle forward, perhaps carrying some lessons about the value and limitations of compartmentalization. Both outcomes reflected choices made, values prioritized, and futures shaped by our own hands. There was a certain justice in that symmetry, a balance that felt right even amid the complicated emotions that remained. I settled into my new office 6 months after the acquisition, watching Boston's skyline from 15 stories up as a gentle snowfall began. Winter had descended on the city, transforming the sharp urban landscape into something softer, boundaries blurred by the accumulating white. It seemed an appropriate metaphor for the transitions that had unfolded since that fateful morning when Drew received divorce papers hours before discovering I was his new CEO. Pinnacle's integration into Vertex Global had proceeded remarkably, well by any objective measure. Client retention had exceeded projections at 97%. The technology platform migration had completed ahead of schedule, and employee satisfaction scores had rebounded after the initial uncertainty to reach pre-acquisition levels. The market had responded positively as well, with Vertex's stock price up 18% since the announcement, reflecting confidence in the strategic alignment we had promised. My phone buzzed with a message from Margaret. Q4 numbers finalized, exceeding targets by 12%. Board presentation ready for your review. I smiled slightly at the update. The quarterly results would further validate the acquisition strategy and my leadership through the transition. What had begun as a personal reclamation of professional territory had evolved into genuine corporate success, independent of the circumstances that had placed me in this position. Perfect timing, I replied. I'll review before the executive dinner tonight. The dinner, a celebration of the successful integration and a recognition of the leadership team that had navigated it, would mark a formal conclusion to the acquisition phase. We would transition from integration to standard operations, from merging two cultures to establishing our unified identity moving forward. A knock at my office door pulled my attention from the window. Jennifer stood in the doorway, bundled in a camel coat dusted with snowflakes, her expression warmly amused. "Don't tell me you're still working at 6:30 on a Friday," she said, stepping inside and unwinding her scarf. "Even CEOs are allowed to start their weekends eventually." "Just finishing a few things before the executive dinner," I explained, gesturing for her to take a seat. "What brings you downtown in this weather?" "Two things," Jennifer replied, setting her bag aside. "First, the house closing is officially complete. The new owners take possession on the 15th. The proceeds have been transferred according to the settlement terms." I nodded, absorbing this final resolution of a major shared asset. The Cambridge townhouse, once the physical manifestation of my marriage to Drew, now belonged to someone else. Another tie severed, another transition completed. "And the second thing?" I asked. Jennifer smiled, reaching into her bag. "Your divorce decree, officially filed, recorded, and now in your hands. Exactly 6 months since that dramatic Friday when you turned Drew's world upside down." She handed me the document. Simple legal. Pages that formally concluded 11 years of marriage. I accepted it without the emotional reaction an outside observer might have expected. The true end had come months earlier with Drew's betrayal. This was merely the administrative conclusion. "Thank you for handling everything so efficiently," I said, setting the document on my desk. The process was much smoother than I anticipated, given the circumstances. "Credit where it's due," Jennifer acknowledged. "Drew never contested anything, never missed a deadline, never attempted to renegotiate terms that clearly favored you. Whatever else happened between you, he took responsibility for the consequences of his actions." This was true. Throughout the divorce proceedings, Drew had maintained the surprisingly mature approach he had demonstrated from the moment he received the papers. He had accepted the settlement terms without challenge, facilitated the property division, and completed his 2-week notice at Pinnacle with professionalism that had impressed even the most skeptical observers. "Have you heard anything about where he landed?" Jennifer asked, watching me carefully. I hesitated before answering. The truth was, I had deliberately avoided seeking information about Drew's current circumstances, maintaining the clean break we had established. However, the business community in Boston was relatively small at the executive level, and certain information had reached me without active pursuit. "I understand he accepted a position with a smaller firm in Providence," I replied finally. "Director level, not the step back some might have expected. Robert mentioned running into him at an industry conference last month, said he seemed to be doing well." Jennifer nodded, studying me with the perceptive gaze that had made her such an effective attorney. "And how do you feel about that? About Drew moving forward professionally after everything that happened?" The question prompted me to consider my actual feelings rather than the expected response. 6 months ago, I might have deflected with a comment about compartmentalization or professional focus. Now, with some distance from the acute phase of both transitions, I found myself capable of more nuanced reflection. "I'm glad," I said, surprising myself somewhat with the genuineness of the sentiment. Not out of any lingering attachment, but because holding on to resentment would require energy better directed elsewhere. His success or failure no longer impacts my life in any meaningful way. Jennifer smiled approvingly. "That's genuinely healthy, Becca. Not forgiveness, exactly, which he may or may not deserve, but release. There's a difference." "Yes," I agreed, recognizing the accuracy of her distinction. Release is precisely the right word. We chatted for a few minutes more about the practicalities of the house closing before Jennifer rose to leave, citing dinner plans across town. At the door, she paused, turning back with an expression of affectionate concern. "You know, when you first outlined your plan 6 months ago, disappearing without explanation, serving divorce papers the same day you were announced as CEO, I worried that the focus on strategic response might be keeping you from processing the emotional impact, that you were channeling everything into the professional counter move." I raised an eyebrow. "Are you saying my strategy wasn't sound?" "Oh, it was brilliant," Jennifer laughed, "and completely justified given what Drew did. But brilliance and healing aren't always the same thing. I'm glad to see you found space for both." After she left, I returned to the window, watching. The snow continued to transform the city below. Jennifer's observation resonated more than I might have admitted even a few months ago. The strategic response to Drew's betrayal had indeed provided structure and purpose during a period of personal upheaval. It had allowed me to channel hurt and anger into productive action, rather than destructive reaction. But she was right that strategic brilliance alone wasn't healing. That had come more gradually, through the steady focus on building my new reality, rather than dismantling Drew's. Through proving my capabilities as CEO independent of the circumstances that had placed me in the position. Through establishing my individual identity separate from the partnership that had defined me for 11 years. My phone buzzed with a reminder about the executive dinner. I gathered my things, sliding the divorce decree into my desk drawer rather than my bag. The document belonged to the past I was leaving behind, not the future I was moving toward. Its purpose had been served. Now it was simply an artifact of a completed transition. The restaurant was elegant but not ostentatious. A private room at Harborview, where the executive team had gathered to mark the successful completion of the integration phase. Robert Chen was already there when I arrived, engaged in conversation with Thomas, Pinnacle's veteran CFO who had proven invaluable during the transition. "Rebecca," Robert greeted me warmly, gesturing to the seat beside him. Perfect timing. We were just discussing the remarkable client retention numbers. Thomas deserves significant credit for that success, I noted as I joined them. His relationships with our institutional clients provided crucial continuity during the ownership transition. The conversation flowed easily as other executives arrived, the atmosphere relaxed and celebratory as befitted the occasion. There was none of the tension that had characterized our early integration meetings, when reporting lines were being redrawn and positions redefined. The team had settled into effective collaboration, the merged organization finding its rhythm after the initial disruption. During dinner, Robert stood to offer a toast, glass raised toward me. To Rebecca, whose leadership through this integration has exceeded every projection and metric we established. The board couldn't be more pleased with both the process and the outcomes. As appreciative nods and murmurs of agreement circulated around the table, I felt a moment of profound professional satisfaction. This recognition reflected achievement, based entirely on merit and results, completely independent of the personal circumstances that had accompanied my appointment. I had proven myself not just as Drew's replacement, but as a genuinely effective leader in my own right. "Thank you," I responded, raising my own glass. "But the success we're celebrating tonight belongs to everyone in this room. Each of you navigated significant change while maintaining focus on our clients and our shared vision. That collective effort is what transformed two companies into one stronger entity." The evening continued with conversation about future growth opportunities, market expansion plans, and the strategic positioning that would define our next phase. I found myself fully engaged in these discussions, my mind occupied with genuine excitement about our professional trajectory rather than the personal reclamation that had initially fueled my acceptance of the CEO position. As the dinner wound down around 11, Robert joined me as I waited for the valet to bring my car. "Significant milestone tonight," he observed. "The formal transition from integration to unified operation." "Yes," I agreed. "Though many would argue the real work begins now that the structural changes are complete. Culture building takes longer than organizational charting." Robert nodded thoughtfully. "True, but you've established the foundation remarkably well, especially given the personal complications you were navigating simultaneously." I glanced at him, still sometimes surprised by his occasional references to the personal dimension of my transition to CEO. Robert's typical focus was so firmly on business metrics that these moments of human awareness remained unexpected. The personal aspects provided additional motivation for success, I acknowledged, though they've become increasingly less relevant as we've progressed. "As it should be," Robert affirmed. "The circumstances of your appointment make for interesting corporate lore, but your performance since then stands entirely on its own merit." My car arrived, and Robert wished me a good weekend before returning inside to conclude conversations with other executives. As I drove through Boston's snow-dusted streets toward my downtown apartment, I found myself reflecting on how thoroughly my life had transformed in 6 months. Professionally, I had ascended to a position I might not have pursued for several more years under normal circumstances. The acquisition had accelerated my career trajectory, creating an opportunity that might otherwise have remained distant. I had proven myself equal to the challenge, establishing authority and vision that had nothing to do with replacing my ex-husband and everything to do with genuine leadership capability. Personally, I had completed the transition from wife to individual, from partner to independent entity. The divorce was finalized, the shared home sold, the legal and financial entanglements resolved. What remained was the woman I had always been beneath the marriage, strategic, composed, forward-focused, but now standing entirely on her own foundation rather than a shared one. When I reached my apartment, I changed into more comfortable clothes and poured a glass of wine, allowing myself a rare moment of reflection as I looked out at the snow-covered city. 6 months ago, I had watched Drew and Olivia through a restaurant window, documenting the visible evidence of his betrayal while planning my strategic response. Tonight, I watched snowflakes transform Boston's skyline, marking the completion of the transitions that response had set in motion. The symmetry was satisfying, though not in the vindictive way I might have anticipated in those early days of hurt and anger. What I felt now was something closer to completion, a recognition that both the professional integration and personal dissolution had reached their natural conclusions, leaving me positioned exactly where I had intended to be. My phone buzzed with a text from Margaret. Final integration report submitted to the board. All metrics exceeded targets. Congratulations again on flawless execution. I smiled at the update, appreciating the objective validation of what we had accomplished. Thank you for your partnership throughout the process, I replied. Couldn't have achieved this without your expertise. Setting my phone aside, I allowed myself to acknowledge something I had kept carefully compartmentalized during the intense focus of the past 6 months. I was proud not just of what I had achieved professionally, but of how I had navigated the personal dimension of this complex transition. I had responded to betrayal not with destructive emotion, but with strategic clarity. I had channeled hurt into productive action rather than pointless recrimination. I had maintained professional focus amid personal upheaval, proving myself capable of separating the two even when they dramatically intersected. And perhaps most surprisingly, I had reached a point of genuine release rather than lingering resentment. Drew had made his choices, prioritizing ego and infatuation over partnership and loyalty. Those choices had cost him his marriage, altered his career trajectory, and fundamentally changed his life circumstances. But they had also, inadvertently, created the conditions for my own transformation, from successful executive to corporate leader, from wife to independent woman fully in command of her own destiny. I hadn't planned that aspect of the outcome when I orchestrated my response to his betrayal. My focus had been on establishing appropriate consequences for his actions, on reclaiming professional territory, on ensuring he understood exactly what his choices had cost him. The personal growth that emerged through that process had been an unexpected benefit rather than a strategic objective. As snow continued to fall outside my window, I found myself experiencing a moment of genuine peace, not the controlled composure I had maintained throughout the transition, but a deeper, more authentic acceptance of both what had ended and what had begun. The marriage was over, concluded with the legal document now in my desk drawer. The acquisition was complete, the integration metrics exceeding all projections. What remained was the future I would continue building, defined entirely by my own choices rather than reactions to someone else's. My phone buzzed again, this time with a text from Jennifer. Just checking in post-divorce decree delivery. How are you feeling about this formal conclusion? I considered the question carefully, wanting to offer a genuine response rather than a predictable one. It feels appropriate, I typed finally. The end of one chapter, the confirmation of another already well underway, closure without lingering attachment. Her response came quickly. That sounds remarkably healthy. Celebration drink tomorrow? Properly mark the transition? I'd like that, I replied, realizing I did actually want to acknowledge this milestone rather than simply filing it away in my mental organization system. The Avery at 7? With plans confirmed, I finished my wine and prepared for bed, aware of a lightness that hadn't been present 6 months ago when I was in the acute phase of responding to Drew's betrayal. The weight of that hurt, the sharp edges of that anger, had gradually transformed into something else. Not forgiveness exactly, as Jennifer had noted, but release. Freedom to move forward without the burden of either the marriage or its dissolution continuing to influence my choices. Drew had replaced me with Olivia, believing he could simply substitute a more accommodating partner for one who challenged his ego and insecurities. He had discovered instead that actions have consequences, that betrayal carries costs, that the woman he had underestimated was capable of orchestrating a response he never anticipated. I had replaced uncertainty with strategy, reaction with calculation, hurt with focused action. The result wasn't just professional advancement or personal vindication, but a genuine transformation into someone stronger, clearer, and more completely herself than the woman who had watched her husband's betrayal through a restaurant window 6 months ago. As snow continued to transform the city outside, I allowed myself to fully acknowledge both the ending and the beginning this day represented. The divorce decree marked the official conclusion of my marriage to Drew. The integration celebration marked the successful completion of my first major achievement as CEO. Both represented transitions executed with strategic precision and professional focus. What remained now was the future, a landscape as transformative in its potential as the snow-covered city below, where familiar structures remained but were viewed through a new perspective, where what had once seemed immutable was revealed as merely temporary, where boundaries blurred and possibilities emerged in unexpected places. Drew had once accused me of compartmentalizing everything too neatly, of filing emotions away in perfectly labeled mental folders. Perhaps there had been truth in that observation. But those same tendencies had allowed me to respond to his betrayal with strategic clarity rather than destructive emotion, to channel hurt into productive action, to transform a personal ending into a professional beginning. Now, with both transitions complete, perhaps I could allow myself something different, a more integrated experience that honored both the strategic thinker and the human being beneath the careful composure. Not as a concession to Drew's criticism, but as a gift to myself as I moved forward into the future I had so carefully designed. As I prepared for bed, my phone buzzed with an unexpected notification. An email had arrived from an address I didn't immediately recognize. Opening it, I was surprised to see Drew's name. The message was brief and straightforward. "Rebecca, I saw the announcement about Pinnacle's quarterly results. The integration success speaks volumes about your leadership. I know congratulations from me might seem strange given our history, but professional respect exists independent of personal mistakes. You've achieved exactly what you set out to do, and I recognize the significance of that accomplishment. Drew." I stared at the message, unsure how to categorize it within my carefully organized mental framework. It wasn't an attempt at reconciliation, or a plea for reconsideration. It contained no excuses or justifications for past behavior. It was simply an acknowledgement, professional respect expressed cleanly, without emotional complications or hidden agendas. After a moment's consideration, I typed a brief response. "Thank you for the professional acknowledgement. I appreciate the courtesy." Short, direct, neither encouraging further communication nor rejecting the gesture of respect. A response that recognized the message for what it was without adding layers of interpretation or emotional complexity. As I set my phone aside and turned out the lights, I found myself thinking about the unexpected symmetry of this final exchange. 6 months ago, I had orchestrated a professional consequence for Drew's personal betrayal. Now, he had offered a professional acknowledgement independent of our personal history. Both represented a separation of domains that had once been inextricably intertwined. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, client relationships to nurture, market opportunities to evaluate, corporate culture to strengthen. I would face them with the same strategic clarity and composed authority that had guided me through the past 6 months. But perhaps, as Jennifer had suggested, I would also allow space for the personal growth that had emerged alongside the professional advancement. For now, as snowflakes continued their gentle transformation of the city below, I embraced the quiet satisfaction of transitions completed according to plan, of consequences aligned with choices, of futures shaped by deliberate action rather than passive acceptance. Drew had replaced me with his assistant, only to discover I had become his CEO. I had replaced reaction with strategy, hurt with focused action, ending with beginning. Both transformations were now complete, leaving only the future we had each created through our respective choices, separate paths proceeding from the conclusion of our shared narrative, each bearing the imprint of decisions made and consequences embraced. I woke the next morning to sunshine refracting through ice crystals on my windows, the overnight snowfall now sparkling in the morning light. The brightness seemed fitting, a visual representation of the clarity I felt after months of navigating complex transitions, both professional and personal. As I prepared for my weekend routine, beginning with a run along the waterfront, despite the winter chill, I found myself approaching the day with a sense of lightness that had been absent during the intense focus of the acquisition period. The burden of orchestrating consequences, of maintaining perfect professional composure amid personal dissolution, had lifted with the completion of both transitions. My phone buzzed with a text from Robert. Favorable coverage of our Q4 results. In today's Financial Times, your leadership specifically mentioned. Well-deserved recognition. I checked the article, pleased to see the analysis focused entirely on the strategic success of the acquisition, rather than the personal circumstances that had accompanied my appointment. 6 months of consistent performance had effectively shifted the narrative from wife becomes husband's boss during divorce to CEO successfully leads complex integration. This evolution in external perception matched my own internal transition, from seeing myself primarily as responding to Drew's betrayal to recognizing my independent professional achievement. The personal catalyst had faded in significance as the professional accomplishment established its own momentum and merit. After my run, I spent the morning handling personal errands that had been neglected during the intense focus on the integration, updating my legal documents to reflect my returned maiden name, researching vacation options for a trip I had promised. Myself once the acquisition was complete, arranging for the last of my belongings to be moved from temporary storage to my apartment. Each task represented another small step in establishing my new reality. Independent, forward-focused, defined by my own choices rather than reactions to someone else's. The practical aspects of transition had a clarifying effect, making tangible the changes that had occurred over the past 6 months. At 7 that evening, I arrived at the Avery to meet Jennifer for our planned celebration. She was already there, having secured a quiet corner table with a view of the harbor. 2 champagne flutes waited on the table, an unsubtle hint at her intended tone for the evening. There she is, Jennifer greeted me with a warm hug. The newly official ex-Mrs. Mitchell and current CEO extraordinaire. I laughed, settling into the chair across from her. I think I prefer Rebecca Taylor, corporate leader, to either of those descriptions. Fair enough, Jennifer conceded, pouring champagne into both flutes. Though both transitions deserve proper recognition, hence the bubbles. We clinked glasses, the ritual feeling appropriately significant for the milestone we were acknowledging. Jennifer's friendship had been a constant throughout the turbulent past 6 months, providing both practical support through the legal complexities and emotional grounding during moments when my careful compartmentalization threatened to falter. I got an email from Drew last night, I mentioned after our first sip. A professional acknowledgement of the integration success, surprisingly mature. Jennifer raised an eyebrow. And how did you respond? Brief acknowledgement, nothing that would encourage further communication but not dismissive either. She nodded approvingly. Perfect balance, recognition without reopening closed doors. She studied me for a moment before continuing. You know, When you first outlined your plan 6 months ago, I worried you might be sublimating genuine grief into strategic revenge. But watching you navigate this transition has been truly impressive. Not just the professional ascension, but the personal evolution. I considered her observation, recognizing the truth in it. The strategic response provided structure when I needed it most. But you were right that it wasn't the same as healing. That's happened more gradually, through proving to myself that I could thrive independently rather than simply responding to his betrayal. "And now?" Jennifer asked, "with both the divorce and integration officially complete?" "Now I build the future I've designed," I replied simply. "Professional growth that has nothing to do with replacing Drew or proving anything to anyone but myself. Personal development beyond the identity of either wife or ex-wife." "To new chapters," Jennifer said, raising her glass again. "Both professionally, brilliant and personally fulfilling." "To new chapters," I echoed, feeling the genuine possibility in those words. As our evening continued with dinner and conversation that ranged far beyond the transitions we were celebrating, I found myself appreciating Jennifer's insistence on marking this milestone rather than simply moving past it. The acknowledgement provided a formal conclusion to a chapter that had begun with betrayal and ended with transformation. By the time I returned to my apartment later that night, I felt a sense of completion that extended beyond the legal finality of the divorce decree or the professional conclusion of the integration phase. I had navigated one of the most challenging periods of my life with strategic clarity and emotional resilience, emerging with both professional advancement and personal growth that would have seemed unlikely just 6 months earlier. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, new dimensions of both professional leadership and personal development. I would face them not as Drew's ex-wife or even as the CEO who had replaced him, but simply as Rebecca Taylor, strategic, composed and now more fully herself than she had been when watching her husband's betrayal through a restaurant window 6 months ago. Drew had replaced me with his assistant, then found out I was his new CEO. But the true transformation had been internal rather than external, personal as much as professional. I had replaced uncertainty with clarity, reaction with strategy, ending with beginning. As I looked out at Boston's skyline, now clear and crystalline in the winter night, I embraced the future I had designed through deliberate choice rather than passive acceptance. The past was properly concluded, its lessons integrated, but its weight released. What remained was the path forward, illuminated by both professional accomplishment and personal wisdom, hard-won through navigating complexity with grace. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.